The noon sun burned mercilessly over Cedar Ridge, Wyoming territory, casting long, cruel shadows that offered no relief from the August heat of 1883. Dust rose from every footstep and clung to every soul in town, settling like judgment. The church bell tolled through the valley, not for worship, but for punishment. It was the kind of sound that made people stop what they were doing, glance toward the square, and whisper. Abigail Maris walked between two deputies, her wrists bound by coarse rope that had rubbed her skin raw. The rough hemp bit into her flesh with every step, but she didn't flinch. Her auburn hair, once pinned neatly beneath a bonnet, now fell in tangled strands around her face. The blue calico dress she'd been mending when they came for her was torn, dust-stained, and heavy with humiliation. Still, she held her chin high as the crowd parted to watch her pass. The people of Cedar Ridge gathered like vultures around a dying thing. Men, women, even children, all drawn by the promise of spectacle. They whispered, sneered, and spat their hate like poison. "There she is, the traitor. Should have known better than to trust a woman with no family. She's got blood on her hands." Old Mrs. Henley, who ran the boarding house, leaned forward from the crowd. "You brought shame on this town, Abigail Maris," she hissed before spitting into the dust at Abigail's feet. The act was a signal, and others followed. A man she'd sewn shirts for, a woman she'd once helped through sickness. All took turns, adding to her humiliation. A wet glob struck her shoulder, sliding down the faded fabric. Abigail kept walking, her heart hammered against her ribs, but she refused to give them the satisfaction of tears. The square opened before her, dominated by the old oak tree that had seen more hangings than weddings. A crude wooden platform stood beneath its heavy branches, and upon it waited Judge Harrison, his black robes absorbing the sun like a grave. The sheriff stood nearby, flanked by his deputies, his face unreadable. The murmurs quieted as Abigail was led up the creaking steps. From up there, she could see the whole town. Faces twisted with anger, curiosity, fear. Somewhere among them, she heard a woman sob, Mrs. Walsh. Her son Timothy had been among the 3 men killed in the Silver Convoy ambush. Abigail had sewn the buttons on his shirt just weeks ago. Now they blamed her for his death. Judge Harrison raised his hand for silence. His voice, when he spoke, carried the weight of authority and rehearsed righteousness. "Citizens of Cedar Ridge," he began, "we are gathered to deliver justice. The accused, Miss Abigail Maris, stands charged with aiding the Dalton gang, providing information that led to the ambush of our silver shipment and the deaths of 3 good men. The evidence," he paused dramatically, holding up a folded letter, "is irrefutable, written in her own hand." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Abigail's stomach twisted. She knew that letter. She'd written it months ago to her cousin in Kansas, describing her small shop, the silver convoys she watched from her window, the routines of her lonely life. Someone had stolen it, altered it, and used it to destroy her. She tried to speak, to explain, but her throat was dry as desert sand. Even if she could find the words, she knew no one would listen. The mob had already decided she was guilty. Judge Harrison's eyes were cold as stone. "Before I read this damning evidence," he said, "does the accused have anything to say?" Abigail opened her mouth, desperate to speak, but before sound could escape, a commotion broke through the crowd. People turned, parting instinctively, as someone pushed forward with steady, determined strides. Ethan Cole, the blacksmith's apprentice, emerged from the sea of faces. His shirt was streaked with soot, his hands blackened from the forge. He wasn't a large man, but his presence seemed to draw all eyes. His jaw was set, his gray eyes sharp and calm, a spark of something dangerous beneath them. He climbed the platform steps as if he belonged there. Judge Harrison glared down at him. "Mr. Cole, this is official business. You've no standing here." Ethan didn't back down. His voice was quiet, but carried over the tense silence. "You're about to hang an innocent woman based on rumors and 1 stolen letter." "Stand down or face arrest," the sheriff warned. Ethan ignored him. He stepped closer to Abigail, his soot-streaked hand lifting her chin gently. For the first time since her arrest, she met eyes that didn't burn with hate. "Actually, Your Honor," he said, turning back to the judge, "I do have standing." His tone hardened. "Because this woman," he placed a hand on her cheek, "is my wife." The words hit the crowd like a thunderclap. Gasps rose. Shouts followed. "Liar!" someone yelled. "Prove it!" cried another. Before anyone could move, Ethan leaned forward and kissed her. It wasn't gentle. It wasn't sweet. It was defiance made flesh, a declaration that dared anyone to interfere. The crowd fell silent, stunned. Abigail stood frozen, breathless, tasting salt from her tears and dust from his lips. In that one moment, the world stopped spinning. When Ethan pulled back, he kept his gaze locked on Judge Harrison. "Now tell me, Your Honor," he said evenly, "is this how you treat a married woman of Cedar Ridge?" Judge Harrison sputtered. "There's no record of such a marriage." "There will be," Ethan said calmly. "Performed in Deadwood 3 weeks ago. I have the certificate. She's under my protection now, and the law is clear. No man touches another man's wife without due process." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. In the territories, marriage was sacred law. Even the sheriff hesitated. Judge Harrison's face flushed dark with fury. "You have 7 days," he said finally, "to produce that certificate. If you can't, both of you will hang." Ethan nodded once. "Agreed." He turned to Abigail, offering his arm with quiet dignity. "Come, wife," he said. "Let's go home." The crowd parted reluctantly as they walked through the square. No longer prisoner and stranger, but man and wife before all of Cedar Ridge. Dust clung to their clothes. Whispers followed them. But the gallows rope hung unused. When they reached the edge of town, Abigail finally spoke, her voice trembling. "Why would you risk everything for me?" Ethan's reply was quiet, almost lost in the wind. "Because 3 years ago I made a choice that cost good people their lives. Today, I made a different one." The sun dipped low over the mountains as they disappeared into the horizon. 2 souls bound by a lie, walking toward a truth neither yet understood. The morning after Ethan Cole's shocking declaration brought no peace to Cedar Ridge. If anything, the town buzzed with a new kind of fury. Word of the blacksmith's bold defiance spread faster than wildfire through dry brush. By sunrise, everyone from the saloon girls to the church deacon had an opinion. Men gathered outside Hutchinson's general store, voices low but heated. "Ain't no way that girl's married to him," someone spat. "Cole's hiding something." Others murmured agreement, suspicion sharpening like a blade. Inside the sheriff's office, Judge Harrison paced the floor like a caged wolf. "He made fools of us," he snarled, "before half the town. I want proof of this so-called marriage, or I'll see both of them swing." Quote, By noon, Sheriff Markham saddled his horse and gathered 2 deputies. They'd ride out to Ethan's supposed home on the edge of town, Mrs. Patterson's old place. It had stood empty since the old widow's passing the year before. Now, apparently, it housed a husband and wife who might both be liars. Meanwhile, at that small weathered house on the outskirts of Cedar Ridge, Abigail sat on the porch steps, watching Ethan work. He'd stripped off his sooty apron and rolled up his sleeves. Every movement was deliberate, the steady rhythm of a man used to solving problems with his hands. He was repairing the porch rail, hammer striking nails in crisp, even blows. Abigail found something comforting in that sound. The world outside might be a storm, but here there was focus, order, calm. "The marriage certificate," she said finally, breaking the silence. "You spoke as if it truly existed." Ethan paused mid-swing. He didn't look up, just rolled the nail between his fingers. "It will," he said simply, her brow furrowed. "That's forgery. It's survival." He met her gaze then, and for a heartbeat she saw the weight behind his calm. "I have a friend in Deadwood, a clerk who owes me a favor. He'll make sure the certificate arrives before the judge's deadline." Abigail exhaled slowly, torn between fear and a strange growing trust. "You're risking your life for me." "Maybe I'm just tired of watching innocent people hang," Ethan said, driving another nail. "Besides," he added quietly, "we'll make it legal soon enough if we choose to." His words stirred something inside her that she didn't dare name. The sound of distant hoofbeats snapped their attention toward the horizon. Dust rose on the trail. Riders! Ethan straightened, his hand instinctively brushing the revolver at his hip. Moments later, Sheriff Markham and Judge Harrison rode into view, flanked by 3 men from the town council: Banker Whitman, mine foreman Brennan, and storekeeper Samuel Hayes. They dismounted, their boots raising small clouds of red dust as they approached. Ethan stepped down from the porch, wiping his hands on a rag. "Mornin', gentlemen," he greeted evenly. "Fine day for visitors." Judge Harrison's face was flushed from the ride and from anger he barely controlled. "Enough games, Cole," he snapped. "You're not married to that woman, and we all know it. You've got 7 days to prove it, and I don't take kindly to mockery of the law." Ethan's gray eyes didn't waver. "What law is that, Judge? The one that lets a mob decide a woman's guilt before she's tried? Or the one that says a man can't protect his wife from injustice?" "She's not your wife," Sheriff Markham growled. Ethan shrugged. "Until proven otherwise, that's exactly what she is." The men shifted uneasily. There was something about his calm that made even seasoned lawmen hesitate. Banker Whitman adjusted his hat nervously. "Even if your claim holds, it doesn't absolve her of the charges. A wife can still face trial for her crimes." "Maybe so," Ethan replied, "but she can't be convicted by mob opinion. She deserves a fair hearing, and that's what I intend to make sure she gets." Judge Harrison scowled. "You're well-versed in territorial law for a blacksmith." Ethan smiled faintly. "I read." The remark hung in the air like a quiet challenge. Mine foreman Brennan, a heavy-set man with a coal-streaked beard, stepped forward. "You think you can outsmart the law, Cole? You're mighty bold for someone with nothing but a hammer to his name." Ethan's voice dropped, cold and steady. "A hammer builds, Brennan, or it breaks. Depends on who's holding it." A dangerous silence followed. Judge Harrison finally spoke again, his tone tight. "Produce that marriage certificate by week's end, or both of you will answer for this deception." Ethan inclined his head. 7 days. You have my word." The men turned to leave, but Sheriff Markham lingered. His voice softened slightly when he spoke. "You're making a mistake, Cole. That woman brought trouble the moment she stepped into town. Whatever you think you're saving her from, it'll drag you down too." Ethan met his gaze without flinching. "Every man has to decide what his life's worth, Sheriff. I've made my choice." Quote. When they were gone, Abigail came out onto the porch, her hands trembling. "You shouldn't have spoken to them like that," she whispered. "You've made enemies of powerful men." "They were already enemies," he said. "Now they just know I'm not afraid." "Why?" she asked softly. "Why risk everything for me?" He set down his hammer, his voice quiet but firm. 3 years ago, I was a lawman, deputy marshal. I made a choice that cost good people their lives because I waited when I should have acted. I swore I'd never stand by again while the innocent suffered. He met her eyes. "When I saw you standing there, facing that rope, I remembered every face I'd failed. This time, I wasn't going to run." Abigail felt something shift inside her. Fear, admiration, maybe both. "You lied to save me," she said. "I told a truth that hasn't happened yet," Ethan replied, "but maybe it will." The wind picked up, carrying the scent of rain from the mountains. Thunder rumbled in the distance like the warning growl of some ancient beast. Abigail looked at him then. The quiet strength, the worn hands, the strange sadness in his eyes, and realized that this man who had lied to save her might be the only honest soul she'd ever met. Tomorrow, they would have to face the judge again. But tonight, as lightning split the horizon and rain began to fall, Abigail Maris sat beside Ethan Cole beneath the creaking porch roof of Mrs. Patterson's old house. No longer prisoner and rescuer, but something more complicated. 2 strangers bound by a lie, and perhaps the beginning of something real. 3 days passed in uneasy silence at the old Patterson house. The storm that had rolled over Cedar Ridge left the air heavy and the ground slick, but it was the tension between Ethan and Abigail that hung thickest. They lived like 2 souls caught between truth and survival, between fear and something new neither dared to name. The townsfolk's whispers grew louder, The married couple became the talk of every table at the Silver Dollar Saloon. Some claimed Ethan had been paid off by Abigail to save her neck. Others swore he was in love with her. But no one could agree on which story they wanted to believe more. On the fourth morning, as Abigail hung clothes on the line, she saw a cloud of dust moving fast across the plain. She shaded her eyes. A rider. Her heart clenched. For a moment she thought it might be the sheriff returning. But it wasn't. It was young Johnny Summers, the telegraph boy, riding hard. He pulled up in front of the porch, his horse breathing heavy. "Mr. Cole," he called out. "Message from the courthouse." The marriage certificate from Deadwood came in on the afternoon wire. "Judge Harrison wants to see you both first thing tomorrow." Abigail felt her knees weaken. It was time. Either their lie would stand, or their lives would end. Ethan nodded calmly. "Tell the judge we'll be there." As the boy rode off, the wind picked up again, tossing Abigail's hair into her face. "Ethan," she whispered, "what if your friend didn't come through?" "He did," Ethan said, though his voice lacked its usual certainty. "He's a man of his word." She studied him, and if he didn't, quote. He looked out toward the horizon, his jaw tightening. "Then we face it together." That night, neither of them slept much. Abigail lay awake listening to the rhythm of the rain dripping from the eaves and the low moan of wind through the cracks in the old walls. She thought about her life before Cedar Ridge, the years of wandering, the loneliness, the foolish hope that she could build a home in a place that never wanted her. And then she thought of Ethan, the stranger who had stepped into a noose meant for her and called her his wife in front of the whole world. When dawn finally came, the sky was gray and heavy. They rode into town side by side, their wagon creaking over the muddy road. People stopped to stare as they passed, some with suspicion, others with something close to shame. The courthouse was already crowded when they arrived. Judge Harrison sat behind the desk, his expression smug and certain. Beside him stood Sheriff Markham, the banker Whitman, and the ever-watchful Marshal Duncan, who had come from the capital to oversee the matter. "Mr. and Mrs. Cole," Harrison began, drawing out the words with icy precision. "We've received a telegram from Deadwood confirming the registration of your marriage certificate. However, there are irregularities." Ethan's shoulders stiffened. "Irregularities?" "The officiating minister, one Reverend Joshua Matthews." "No one in Deadwood seems to know him," Marshal Duncan said. His eyes, cold and calculating, met Ethan's. "Can you explain that?" "Yes," Ethan said evenly. "He was a traveling preacher, passed through Deadwood briefly, performed our ceremony before moving on west. Not everyone keeps records out here." "Convenient," Harrison muttered. Ethan didn't rise to the bait. "The certificate bears proper seals and witnesses. I trust the law will honor that." Marshal Duncan studied him for a long moment before folding the paper. "It appears legitimate," he said finally. "I see no reason to dispute its validity." The judge's jaw tightened. He'd been hoping to expose the lie, but the marshal's authority was higher than his own. "Very well," Harrison said stiffly. "The marriage stands. Mrs. Cole will receive a fair trial as required by law." Abigail let out a breath she didn't know she'd been holding, but the relief was short-lived. As they turned to leave, the courtroom doors swung open with a crash. Sheriff Markham burst in, his hat dripping rain. "Judge, you'll want to hear this. We've got a rioter," says Silas Dorn's been spotted heading this way. The name sent a shiver through the room. Silas Dorn, the last surviving member of the Dalton gang. The man who'd planned the Silver Convoy ambush. The man everyone thought dead. Abigail froze. "He's alive?" "Alive and meaner than ever," the sheriff said grimly. "And if he's coming to Cedar Ridge, he ain't coming for the weather." Ethan's hand instinctively dropped to his holster. "He's coming to finish what he started." That night, the air felt wrong, too still, too heavy. Ethan cleaned his rifle by lantern light, while Abigail packed a small satchel, just in case. "We could leave," she said quietly. "Head north. Start over." He shook his head. "Running never fixes anything. I've done enough of that." Quote, "Ethan," she said softly, "you don't owe me your life." He looked up from the gun, his eyes steady. "I made a promise to protect you, and I intend to keep it." They didn't have to wait long. Near midnight, the distant thunder of hooves echoed through the valley. Abigail's blood ran cold. Ethan rose from his chair, grabbed the rifle, and moved to the window. A lone rider emerged from the darkness. Even from a distance, his shadow was unmistakable. Broad shoulders, hat pulled low, long coat flapping in the wind. "Silas Dorn," Ethan murmured. "He's come to claim the devil's due." Abigail's breath came shallow. What does he want? Either her silence, Ethan thought grimly, or revenge. Out loud, he said, "Stay inside, bar the back door." But Silas wasn't sneaking. He wanted them to hear him coming. His horse thundered to a stop just 20 paces from the porch. "Well, well," Silas called out, his voice slick with mockery. "If it ain't the lady traitor and her noble savior. Heard you two been playing house. Figured I'd pay my respects." Quote, Ethan stepped out into the rain, rifle in hand. "You're not welcome here, Dorn." Silas grinned, showing teeth. "That's so? You got a funny way of greeting old friends." "We were never friends." "Maybe not, but you sure helped me once, didn't you?" Silas said, his tone turning venomous. "Your fancy letter kept the army off my back long enough to rob that convoy." Abigail's heart lurched. "That's a lie." "Oh, I know, sweetheart," Silas sneered. "But your town don't. Funny thing about lies, they live longer than truth." Lightning flashed, illuminating his pistol as he drew it. "Now, why don't you be a good husband, Cole, and step aside?" Ethan didn't move. "You'll have to go through me." Gladly, Silas growled and fired. The first shot cracked through the night. Ethan dove for cover as splinters exploded from the porch post. He rolled, steadied his aim, and returned fire. The report of his rifle thundered through the storm, striking Silas in the shoulder. The outlaw staggered, but didn't fall. Abigail screamed his name. She grabbed Ethan's spare Winchester from the wall, her hands trembling. She'd never fired a gun in her life, but she aimed through the window anyway. Silas charged, rage burning through his pain. Ethan fired again, missed. The outlaw was too close now, only a few feet from the door. Abigail's finger tightened on the trigger. The gun kicked hard against her shoulder. The bullet struck Silas in the leg. He stumbled, cursed, and raised his weapon toward her. But Ethan was faster. His final shot hit true. Silas Dorn fell face first into the mud, his pistol dropping from lifeless fingers. The storm raged on. Abigail ran to Ethan, who was on one knee, panting. "Are you hurt?" she cried. He shook his head, though his arm bled where a stray bullet had grazed him. "I'm fine. It's over." But as she clung to him, sobbing with relief, Ethan whispered the words she couldn't hear over the rain. "No, Abigail, it's only beginning." Quote, by dawn, Sheriff Markham and his men arrived to find Silas Dorn dead and the truth written clear in his saddlebags. Maps, letters, plans that proved Abigail's innocence beyond doubt. When the townsfolk gathered that evening, no one spat. No one whispered. They watched instead as Ethan and Abigail stood together in front of the old oak tree, the same place where the mob once called for her death. The preacher spoke softly, words of redemption and grace. Then Ethan turned to her, eyes full of quiet pride. "Seems we've been playing husband and wife long enough," he said. "How about we make it real?" Abigail smiled through her tears. "You already did, Ethan. The moment you kissed me in front of them all. And under that same tree, where hate once ruled, the people of Cedar Ridge bowed their heads as Ethan Cole and Abigail Maris were married for real this time." The sun broke through the clouds, painting gold across the wet earth. For the first time in years, the town felt clean again. The story of the traitor who became a wife, and the man who saved her with one defiant kiss, would live on in Cedar Ridge for generations.